The alarm clock buzzed for the third time that morning. Lily Chen reached over with tired fingers and finally shut it off. 4 hours of sleep. Again. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes in the dim light filtering through the worn curtains of her small apartment. The digital clock read 5:15 a.m., time to start another long day. As she moved quietly through her morning routine, Lily checked on her 2 children still fast asleep in the bedroom they shared. 10-year-old Danny was sprawled across his twin bed, while 6-year-old May curled up with her favorite stuffed rabbit. Lily smiled despite her exhaustion. Everything she did was for them. She left a note on the kitchen counter for Mrs. Wu, the elderly neighbor who watched the kids after school until Lily's sister could pick them up after her own shift ended. The delicate balance of childcare and work schedules was always one small problem away from collapse, but Lily had no choice. Since her husband walked out 2 years ago, she had become the only provider for her family. By 6 a.m., Lily was on the bus heading to TechVision Industries, where she worked in the accounting department. She had started as a temporary data entry clerk 3 years ago, but had proven herself so valuable that they'd hired her full-time. 6 months ago, when bills began piling up and May needed special tutoring for her reading difficulties, Lily had requested to work double shifts whenever possible. Now she worked from 7 a.m. to sometimes as late as 11 p.m., with just a brief break in between to call home and check on her children. Across town, in a spacious penthouse apartment, Thomas Reed was already awake and reviewing company reports over his morning coffee. As the CEO of TechVision Industries, his days started early and ended late. At 45, Thomas had built the company from a small tech startup to a mid-sized firm with over 300 employees. He prided himself on knowing the business inside and out. Thomas frowned as he scrolled through the monthly efficiency reports. Something stood out to him, a name that kept appearing in the top performer metrics across several departments. Lily Chen. The name was familiar, but he couldn't quite place a face to it. TechVision had grown quickly in the past few years, making it impossible for him to know every employee personally anymore. Chen, he muttered to himself, scrolling through her employee file. Accounting department. Also helps in customer service during peak hours. Occasionally assists in packaging for special orders. Thomas raised his eyebrows, impressed. According to her file, Lily had been working double shifts for months now without a single complaint or mistake in her work. Later that morning, Thomas walked through the main office floor, nodding and greeting employees as he passed. He paused at the entrance to the accounting department and scanned the room, wondering which of the focused workers was Lily Chen. His attention was drawn to a petite woman with her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was explaining something to a new hire with patience and clarity, despite the stack of work on her own desk. Thomas made a mental note to watch for her more often. In his experience, employees who consistently performed above expectations without seeking recognition were rare treasures in any business. As the weeks passed, Thomas found himself noticing Lily more and more. She was always the first to arrive and among the last to leave. During company meetings, she took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions. When other departments needed help, she volunteered despite her already packed schedule. Yet there was something in her eyes, a weariness that went beyond normal job fatigue. One Tuesday afternoon, Thomas was heading to a meeting when he overheard a conversation in the break room. The company had recently started a new program allowing employees working late shifts to take meals from the cafeteria. "I don't know how you do it, Lily," a young man was saying as he poured coffee. "Don't you ever get tired?" Lily gave a small laugh. "Of course I do, but the extra pay is worth it." "Well, at least now you can get dinner here. That's something, right?" There was a pause before Lily responded. "Actually, I was wondering, do you think they would mind if sometimes I took the food home instead of eating here? On the nights when my shift ends at 11, it would be nice to have something to eat when I get home." Thomas stepped away before hearing the response, not wanting to eavesdrop further, but the conversation stayed with him. It seemed like such a small request, yet Lily had sounded almost apologetic asking for it. The next day, Thomas called a meeting with the cafeteria manager. "The take-home meal program for late-shift workers," Thomas began. "How's it going?" The manager nodded enthusiastically. "Very well, sir. It's been popular, especially with the tech team working on the new product launch." Good. And what's the policy on employees taking food home instead of eating here?" The manager looked confused. Well, we hadn't really considered that. The idea was to provide meals for those working through dinner hours. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Let's expand the program. If employees prefer to take meals home, they should feel free to do so. Sometimes people need to get back to their families, or maybe they're just tired and want to eat in the comfort of their own homes. The policy change was announced that afternoon. Thomas watched from across the room as Lily read the email. The small smile that crossed her face confirmed he'd made the right decision. Over the next few weeks, Thomas noticed Lily occasionally stopping by the cafeteria near the end of her first shift, picking up a meal before heading to her second job assignment. At first, it was just once or twice a week. Then it became more frequent. During a budget review meeting, Thomas found himself looking at employee performance records again. Lily's name continued to stand out. Not only was she maintaining excellent work quality despite her grueling schedule, but she hadn't taken a single sick day in over 2 years. The HR report also noted she had volunteered to work Christmas and Thanksgiving the previous year. Does anyone know much about Lily Chen personally? Thomas asked the management team after they'd finished discussing quarterly targets. His operations director shrugged. Only that she's extremely reliable. Never complains, always willing to help. I think she's a single mom. The HR manager nodded. 2 kids, if I remember correctly. She requested the double shifts herself, which is unusual. Most people try to work less, not more. And she commutes from Riverdale, doesn't she? Asked the marketing director. That's nearly an hour each way on public transportation. Thomas frowned. Riverdale was one of the areas hardest hit by the economic downturn. Housing was cheaper there, but it was far from ideal, especially for a single mother with young children. After the meeting, Thomas found himself walking past the accounting department again. Through the glass walls, he could see Lily on the phone, her expression serious as she made notes. Something about her caught his attention. Not just her work ethic, but a quiet dignity in how she carried herself despite what must be overwhelming pressure. As Thomas returned to his office, he made a decision. He would find a way to learn more about Lily's situation, not out of mere curiosity, but because something told him there was more to her story than just a dedicated employee working extra hours to make ends meet. When the monthly employee recognition meeting came around, Thomas made sure Lily's name was at the top of the list. The company had always rewarded outstanding performance, and few employees had earned it more. Yet when her name was called and she walked shyly to the front to receive her bonus, Thomas noticed she seemed almost uncomfortable with the attention. "Thank you," she said quietly when he handed her the envelope. "This means a lot. You've earned it," Thomas replied. "TechVision is lucky to have you." For just a moment their eyes met, and Thomas saw something flash across her face. Gratitude mixed with what looked like worry. Before he could say anything else, she had nodded politely and returned to her seat. That afternoon, Thomas asked his assistant to add Lily's file to his review list. There was something about her situation that didn't quite add up, and Thomas had built his business on paying attention to details that others missed. Little did he know that his curiosity about this hardworking employee would soon lead him to a discovery that would change not only her life but the entire company's culture, and his own understanding of what it meant to be a leader. Over the next few weeks, Thomas found himself watching Lily from a distance, not in a way that made others uncomfortable, but with the careful eye of someone trying to solve a puzzle. As CEO, he'd always believed that understanding his employees was key to running a successful business. But his interest in Lily went beyond professional curiosity. "Did you see the productivity numbers from accounting again?" Thomas asked his CFO, Robert, during their weekly meeting. Robert nodded, sliding a report across the table. "Up 12% from last quarter. Lily Chen is single-handedly responsible for at least a third of that increase." Thomas tapped his pen against the report. "She's working too hard. Nobody maintains that pace without burning out eventually. Should we talk to her about cutting back her hours?" Robert suggested. Thomas shook his head. "No, there's a reason she's pushing herself this way. I'd like to understand what it is first." After the meeting, Thomas walked down to the cafeteria. It was nearly 6 p.m., the time when day shift workers headed home and evening shift employees started arriving. He spotted Lily at the cafeteria counter, speaking quietly with Miguel, the evening kitchen manager. "2 meals tonight?" Thomas overheard Miguel ask as he boxed up some food. Lily nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "If that's okay." My sister is working late and the kids will be hungry when I get home. Miguel smiled warmly. No problem. The chicken is good today. I added extra vegetables for the little ones. Thank you, Lily said, gratitude evident in her voice. I really appreciate it. Thomas pretended to check his phone as Lily collected the boxes and carefully placed them in her bag. He noticed how she paused to check the time, her shoulders tensing slightly before she hurried toward the elevator that would take her to the customer service floor for her second shift. The next morning, Thomas called Patricia from Human Resources into his office. What can you tell me about Lily Chen's situation? He asked after they'd exchanged pleasantries. I've noticed she's been working double shifts consistently for months now. Patricia consulted her tablet. She requested the additional hours about 6 months ago. She's been a model employee since she started here, but lately she seems stretched thin, though her work hasn't suffered. Family situation? Single mother, 2 children. Her husband left about 2 years ago. No child support from what I understand. Patricia hesitated. There was an incident last month. Her daughter needed some specialized testing for learning difficulties, and Lily asked about our healthcare coverage. Unfortunately, our plan doesn't cover educational assessments. Thomas frowned. What happened? She thanked me for the information and left. The next day, she asked about additional weekend shifts. I assume she found a way to pay for it herself. That evening, Thomas stayed late at the office. Around 10:30 p.m., he walked through the customer service department where the night team was handling calls from clients in different time zones. Lily sat at her desk, phone to her ear, patiently explaining something to a customer. Even after a full day of work, her voice remained calm and professional. When she finished the call, Thomas approached her desk. Working late again, Lily? She looked up, surprise crossing her face when she recognized the CEO. Mr. Reed? Yes, I find the evening shift quite peaceful, actually. Thomas smiled. You're doing exceptional work. I've seen your name come up in several reports. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Thank you. I just try to do my best. I've noticed you've been taking advantage of the meal program regularly, Thomas said casually. I'm glad it's helpful. Something flickered in Lily's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Yes, it's been a big help. I hope that's okay. Of course, Thomas assured her quickly. That's exactly why we started the program. I was just wondering if there's anything else we could do to support our employees working long hours. Lily relaxed slightly. The meals have been wonderful, especially on nights when I get home too late to cook. She glanced at her phone, checking the time. My children. They're good kids. They understand I need to work, but it's hard for them sometimes. Before Thomas could respond, Lily's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression shifting to concern. Everything okay? Thomas asked. Yes, just my sister checking in. She stays with the kids when I work late. Lily began gathering her things. I'm sorry, but my shift ends in 10 minutes. I should get ready to catch the last bus. Thomas nodded. Of course. Don't let me keep you. As Lily hurried away, Thomas stood there deep in thought. The conversation had confirmed his suspicions. Lily wasn't just working for herself. She had responsibilities, people who depended on her, and something told him the situation was more complicated than he realized. The following week, Thomas requested a full review of employee benefits, particularly for those with families. He also began looking more closely at the meal program usage statistics. Lily wasn't the only employee taking food home, but she was among the most frequent users of the program, often requesting meals 3 or 4 times a week. During a leadership meeting, Thomas brought up the topic of employee support systems. I'm concerned we're not doing enough for employees facing financial hardship, he said, especially those with children. His executive team exchanged glances. The company is doing well, said Robert, but we're not a charity. We already offer competitive benefits. Sometimes competitive isn't enough, Thomas replied. I've been watching some of our hardest working employees struggle despite putting in overtime hours. There's something wrong with that picture. After the meeting, Thomas called Miguel from the cafeteria. The meal program for late shift workers, Thomas began. Have you noticed any patterns in how people are using it? Miguel thought for a moment. Most take food for themselves. A few take extra for family members. Lily Chen often asks if she can take meals home instead of eating here. Sometimes she requests extra portions. And do you give them to her? Miguel nodded. She works so hard and she's always polite. Never demands anything. Last week she asked if we ever had food that would otherwise go to waste. I told her we sometimes have extras at the end of the day, and now she stops by before leaving to see if there's anything left over. Thomas thanked Miguel and walked slowly back to his office, mulling over this new information. Why would someone working as much as Lily need to ask about leftover food? Her salary wasn't enormous, but it should have been enough to cover basic needs, especially with the overtime hours. The next day, Thomas reviewed the company's payroll records. Lily's salary was indeed modest, but with her double shifts she was earning more than many mid-level employees. Yet something still didn't add up. People working that much overtime usually did so for a specific goal, saving for a house, paying off debt, or building a nest egg. Lily seemed to be working just to keep her head above water. His curiosity growing, Thomas did something he rarely did. He looked up Lily's address in the employee database. She lived in Riverdale, as he'd heard, in an area that had once been middle class but had fallen on hard times in recent years. He pulled up a map on his computer and studied the neighborhood. It was far from the office, requiring a lengthy commute by public transportation. The area was known for its aging apartment buildings and limited services. Later that week, Thomas noticed Lily speaking with Diane, another single mother who worked in marketing. "How's Danny doing with that science project?" Diane was asking. Lily smiled, her face lighting up at the mention of her son. "He's so excited about it. We've been collecting recycled materials to build a model solar system." "And May? Has she started her reading program?" "Yes, thanks for asking. The tutor you recommended has been wonderful. She's already showing improvement." Lily's smile faltered slightly. "It's expensive, but worth every penny." Thomas moved away, not wanting to eavesdrop, but the conversation stayed with him. Despite her financial constraints, Lily was clearly devoted to giving her children the best opportunities she could. One evening the following week, Thomas decided to stay late at the office. Around 9 p.m., he walked through the customer service area and noticed Lily's desk was empty. Concerned, he asked the supervisor where she was. "She called in earlier," the supervisor explained. "Said she couldn't make her second shift tonight. First time she's ever missed one." She sounded upset but didn't explain why. Thomas thanked him and headed back to his office, feeling uneasy. For Lily to miss a shift, something significant must have happened. The next day, Lily returned to work, looking tired but composed. Thomas watched from a distance as she went about her duties, noticing how she kept checking her phone throughout the day. At lunchtime, he saw her in the cafeteria speaking with Miguel again. "I hate to ask," he overheard her saying, "but would it be possible to take a few extra meals today? I won't be able to come in tomorrow and I need to make sure, well, that there's enough food at home." Something in her voice, a subtle tremor of worry, caught Thomas's attention. Miguel immediately began packing up several containers, adding extra bread and fruit without being asked. As Lily thanked him and turned to leave, Thomas made a decision. He would find out what was really going on with his hard-working employee, not just out of curiosity now, but out of genuine concern. Tomorrow, when Lily wasn't at work, he would deliver some additional meals himself, and perhaps discover what was behind her increasing requests for food. What Thomas didn't realize was that his simple act of curiosity was about to open his eyes to a reality he never expected to find, one that would change his perspective on his employees, his company, and his own role as a leader forever. Thomas sat in his office the next morning, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. His mind kept returning to Lily and her increasingly frequent requests for take-home meals. As CEO, he prided himself on creating a company that cared for its employees. But was Tech Vision truly supporting them if someone as hard-working as Lily was struggling? He picked up his phone and called Jennifer, the company's ethics officer. "Jennifer, I need your advice on something," Thomas began once pleasantries were exchanged. "I'm concerned about an employee who seems to be facing some serious difficulties." He explained the situation with Lily, her double shifts, her request for food, and her unexplained absence today. "I'm thinking of bringing some additional meals to her home," he concluded. "Would that cross a professional boundary?" Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Your concern comes from a good place," she finally said. "But you're right to question whether it's appropriate. As CEO, your actions carry additional weight." "I know," Thomas sighed. "The last thing I want is to make her uncomfortable. Why not frame it as a company initiative?" Jennifer suggested. We've been discussing expanding our employee support programs anyway. You could explain that you're personally reviewing needs and potential solutions. Thomas nodded, warming to the idea. That could work. It keeps things professional while still allowing me to check on her situation. After ending the call, Thomas went down to the cafeteria to speak with Miguel. I heard Lily won't be in today, he said, and that she asked for extra meals yesterday. Miguel nodded. She seemed worried. Not just tired like usual, but actually concerned about something. I'm thinking of bringing some additional food to her home, Thomas explained, as part of our review of employee support services. Could you prepare something that would last a family a few days? Miguel's face lit up. Of course. I've got some hearty soup I could pack up. Some bread, sandwich fixings, fruit. He trailed off, already mentally assembling packages. An hour later, Thomas loaded several large bags of food into his car. Miguel had outdone himself, preparing enough meals to feed a family for nearly a week. As he programmed Lily's address into his GPS, Thomas felt a mixture of concern and curiosity. In his 15 years as CEO, he'd never done anything quite like this before. The GPS indicated a 45-minute drive to Riverdale, longer than he'd expected. The route took him through areas of the city he rarely visited. As he drove farther from downtown, the neighborhoods gradually changed. Modern office buildings gave way to older residential areas. Well-maintained homes were replaced by apartment complexes showing signs of age and neglect. By the time he entered Riverdale, Thomas was driving through streets lined with buildings badly in need of repair, past closed storefronts and empty lots. Thomas slowed as the GPS announced he was approaching his destination. He double-checked the address, certain there must be a mistake. The GPS had led him not to an apartment building as he'd expected, but to what appeared to be a community center. The faded sign out front read, Riverdale Community Resource Center. Confused, Thomas parked and checked Lily's employee file on his phone. The address matched exactly. Perhaps she lived in an apartment attached to or above the center. The building was an old converted school, with additions that suggested it had been repurposed several times over the decades. Thomas gathered 2 of the food bags and approached the main entrance. A handwritten sign indicated the center was open, so he pushed through the door into a large multi-purpose room. Several tables were set up, and about a dozen people were gathered in small groups. Some appeared to be filling out paperwork, while others were sorting through boxes of clothing and household items. An older woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun approached him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice friendly but cautious. "I'm looking for Lily Chen," Thomas explained. "I'm Thomas Reed, her employer." The woman's expression changed to one of recognition. "Oh, you're from Tech Vision." Lily's mentioned her job there many times. She extended her hand. "I'm Grace, the center coordinator." Thomas shook her hand, still confused. "Does Lily work here too?" Grace smiled. "Not officially, no. She volunteers when she can, though she's been stretched thin lately." She glanced at the bags in Thomas's hands. "Are those for Lily's program?" "Program?" Thomas repeated. "The food assistance program she runs," Grace explained, gesturing toward a door at the back of the room. "She's in the kitchen now, preparing lunch for today's visitors. Come, I'll take you to her." Bewildered, Thomas followed Grace through the main room and down a hallway to a large industrial kitchen. The smell of vegetable soup filled the air. And there, wearing an apron over her usual neat work clothes, was Lily, stirring a massive pot while giving instructions to 2 teenage volunteers. "Lily," Grace called out, "someone here to see you." Lily looked up and her expression froze when she saw Thomas. The wooden spoon in her hand clattered against the pot. "Mr. Reed," she gasped. "What are you doing here?" Thomas held up the bags awkwardly. "I brought some food. Miguel mentioned you wouldn't be in today, and I was concerned." Lily wiped her hands on her apron, her face a mixture of surprise and embarrassment. "You didn't have to do that. I would have been back tomorrow." Before Thomas could respond, a young boy burst into the kitchen. It took Thomas a moment to recognize him as Danny, Lily's son whom he'd seen in a family photo on her desk. "Mom, Mrs. Wu needs help with the—" Danny stopped abruptly when he noticed Thomas. "Who's that?" he asked, moving closer to his mother. "This is Mr. Reed," Lily explained gently. "He's the CEO of the company where I work." Danny's eyes widened. "The big boss? Why is he here?" Lily placed a reassuring hand on her son's shoulder. He just came to drop something off. Danny, can you go tell Mrs. Wu I'll be there in a minute? After Danny left, an uncomfortable silence filled the kitchen. The teenage volunteers had stopped what they were doing and were watching curiously. Lily seemed to notice this and sighed. Let's talk outside, she suggested, untying her apron. She led Thomas through a side door into a small garden area behind the building. Several raised beds contained vegetables at various stages of growth. A few wooden benches were arranged under a weathered pergola. This is where we grow some of our produce for the kitchen, Lily explained, gesturing to the garden. Then she turned to face Thomas directly. I suppose you're wondering what's going on. Thomas nodded. I am. Your address? This isn't a home. Lily looked down, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her shirt. No, it's not. Not in the traditional sense, anyway. She took a deep breath. The truth is, my children and I have been living at the center for the past 3 months. We have a room upstairs. Thomas tried to hide his shock. What happened to your apartment? The building was condemned after a pipe burst and caused structural damage. Several families were displaced, including ours. With housing costs so high and my daughter's special tutoring, she shrugged. We couldn't find an affordable place right away. The center offered temporary housing while I save up for a new security deposit. Thomas set the food bags on a nearby bench. Why didn't you say anything? The company could have helped. Lily's chin lifted slightly. I've always solved my own problems, Mr. Reed, and I didn't want special treatment at work. I'm good at my job, and I want to be valued for that, not pitied because of my circumstances. Thomas was about to respond when a commotion from inside caught their attention. They both turned to see a small elderly man shuffling toward them, supported by a walker. Behind him, Danny was holding the door open. Lily, the man called out, his voice surprisingly strong for his frail appearance. Is lunch ready yet? Mrs. Wu said you've got company, but everyone's getting hungry. Lily quickly moved to help the man. Mr. Patel, you shouldn't be walking around without help. Yes, lunch is almost ready. Mr. Patel squinted at Thomas. Who's this fellow? New volunteer? This is my boss, Lily explained patiently. He just stopped by briefly. Mr. Patel studied Thomas for a moment. Well, is he staying for lunch? We've always got room for one more, though Lily stretches that soup pretty thin sometimes. He chuckled at his own joke. Before Lily could answer, a woman's voice called from inside. Lily. The soup is boiling over. I have to go, Lily said apologetically to Thomas. Thank you for bringing the food. It's very kind, but really not necessary. As she hurried inside, Danny lingered in the doorway, looking at Thomas with curious eyes. Are you really the big boss? Mom says you run the whole company. Thomas smiled at the boy. That's right. Your mom is one of our best employees. Danny nodded solemnly. She works really hard. Sometimes too hard, I think. But she says it's important to help people when you can. That's why we help here at the center, too, even though we don't have much ourselves. The simple wisdom in the child's words struck Thomas deeply. Before he could respond, Danny continued. Are you staying for lunch? Mom's soup is really good. She makes it stretch when more people show up than we expected. Thomas glanced at his watch, then at the boy's hopeful face. His afternoon meeting suddenly seemed far less important than understanding what was happening here. I think I will stay, he decided, if that's okay. Danny's face broke into a wide smile. Great, you can sit by me. I'll tell you all about how Mom helps everyone here. He held the door open. Come on, I'll show you around before the food's ready. As Thomas followed Danny back inside, he realized his simple act of delivering food had opened the door to something much bigger than he'd anticipated. What exactly was Lily doing here? And why was a woman who could barely afford a place to live spending her one day off cooking for others? The more Thomas saw, the more questions formed in his mind. But one thing was becoming clear. There was far more to Lily Chen than he had ever imagined. Danny led Thomas through the community center with the enthusiasm only a 10-year-old could muster. This used to be a school a long time ago, he explained, pointing out features of the building. Now it's where people come when they need help. The center was larger than it had appeared from outside. Beyond the main room, there were several smaller spaces. A makeshift classroom where a teenage girl was helping younger children with homework, a corner set up with computers, and a room with several cots that Danny explained was for emergency overnight stays. And upstairs is where some people live for a while, Danny continued. That's where we have our room. Mom says it's just temporary until we find a real home again. Thomas nodded, trying to process everything he was seeing. And your mom? She cooks for everyone here? Not every day, Danny clarified. Just when Mrs. Wu can't do it. Mom says Mrs. Wu's arthritis makes it hard for her to stand up too long. But Mom always helps on her day off, and sometimes she brings food from her work too. Thomas felt a pang of guilt. The meals Lily had been requesting weren't just for her family. She'd been sharing them with everyone at the center. Danny led him back toward the kitchen, where delicious smells were now wafting through the building. People were beginning to gather in the dining area. Elderly residents, a few families with young children, and what appeared to be some local workers on their lunch break. In the kitchen, Lily was efficiently directing her small team, looking more confident and in command than Thomas had ever seen her at work. She glanced up as they entered, her expression still showing traces of embarrassment at having her boss witness her circumstances. "Danny, please help Mrs. Wu set the tables," she said. As her son scampered off, she turned to Thomas. "You really don't have to stay. I'm sure you have important things to do." "Nothing more important than this right now," Thomas replied honestly. "Lily, I had no idea about any of this." Lily sighed, stirring the enormous pot of soup one last time before turning off the heat. "It's not something I talk about at work. Like I said, I don't want people's pity." "It's not pity I'm feeling," Thomas assured her. "It's admiration. You work double shifts, care for your children, and still find time to help all these people." Before Lily could respond, an older woman entered the kitchen. "The tables are ready, Lily. We've got 28 today, including 4 new families from the Pine Street apartments." "Thanks, Mrs. Wu," Lily replied. "We should have enough. Mr. Reed brought some extra food from Tech Vision so we can send people home with meals for tonight, too." Mrs. Wu turned her attention to Thomas, studying him with sharp eyes. "So you're Lily's boss? The big CEO she's always talking about?" Thomas felt strangely nervous under her scrutiny. "Yes, I'm Thomas Reed." Mrs. Wu said, looking him up and down. "Lily says you run a good company. Treats people fairly. That true? I try to," Thomas said, suddenly uncertain. Mrs. Wu's expression softened slightly. "Well, you must be doing something right. Lily works too hard, but she says it's worth it because she believes in what your company does." As they carried the food out to the dining area, Thomas noticed Lily greeting each person by name, asking about specific concerns, how someone's doctor appointment had gone, whether another had heard back about a job application, if a child's cold was getting better. Lunch was served family style, with everyone passing dishes around the mismatched tables that had been pushed together to form one long dining area. Thomas found himself seated between Danny and an elderly man who introduced himself as Mr. Chen, no relation to Lily. "First time at our little community meal?" Mr. Chen asked, breaking a piece of bread. Thomas nodded. "I work with Lily. I didn't know she was involved with the center." Mr. Chen smiled, revealing missing teeth. "That woman is a blessing. When the pipes burst in our building and they condemned it, many of us had nowhere to go. Lily organized everything, found temporary housing here at the center for those who needed it most, helped others connect with relatives. She even used her own security deposit refund to buy cots and supplies." Across the table, a young woman with a toddler on her lap nodded in agreement. "Lily helped me fill out applications for assistance programs. I'd lost my job when the daycare closed, and without her help, I don't know what would have happened to me and my daughter." Throughout the meal, Thomas heard similar stories from almost everyone at the table. Lily had helped an elderly couple navigate their insurance paperwork after a medical emergency. She'd tutored a teenage boy so he could pass his GED exam. She'd organized a community garden in the back lot so families could grow fresh vegetables. When Thomas looked for Lily, he spotted her at the far end of the table, helping a frail, elderly woman eat. She wasn't just serving these people food. She was giving them dignity, respect, and genuine care. After the meal, as people began clearing dishes, Thomas offered to help with cleanup. In the kitchen, he found himself working alongside a middle-aged man with a slight limp who introduced himself as Howard. "So you're from Tech Vision," Howard said as they scraped plates. "Nice place. I worked there myself once upon a time." Thomas nearly dropped the plate he was holding. "You worked at Tech Vision when?" "About 3 years ago," Howard replied. "I was in the shipping department for almost 7 years. Got laid off during that big restructuring." Thomas felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The restructuring had been his decision, a necessary cost-cutting measure during a difficult financial quarter. He'd reviewed the numbers, approved the departments that would be affected, but he'd never followed up on what happened to those employees. "I'm sorry," Thomas said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. I was part of that decision," Howard shrugged. "Business is business." It was tough, though. Right after that, I slipped on some ice and messed up my knee. Couldn't get another warehouse job with a bum leg. Been doing odd jobs ever since. "How did you end up here?" Thomas asked. "Lily found me," Howard said simply. "I was sleeping in my car after I couldn't make rent. She recognized me from Tech Vision, brought me here, helped me apply for disability. Now I help out around the center when I can. There's a few of us former Tech Vision folks, actually. Lily keeps an eye out." The revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. His own former employees were among the people. Lily was helping, people who had fallen through the cracks after decisions he had made from the comfortable distance of his executive office. When the kitchen was clean, Thomas found Lily in a small office organizing donated clothing. Her daughter May sat nearby, quietly reading a book with intense concentration. "Your daughter?" Thomas asked softly. Lily looked up and nodded, a gentle smile crossing her tired face. "Yes, that's May. She has dyslexia, but she's working so hard with her tutor. The special reading program is expensive, but it's making such a difference." Thomas watched the little girl sound out words, her finger carefully tracing each line. "That's why you started the double shifts," he realized aloud. "Partly," Lily admitted. "The apartment situation complicated things further. But we're managing." Thomas gestured around them. "Managing? Lily, you're doing so much more than managing. You're supporting an entire community here." Lily shook her head. "I'm just doing what anyone would do. These people are my neighbors, my friends. When our building was condemned, we all needed help. It made sense to work together. But you're working yourself to exhaustion," Thomas pointed out. "Double shifts, volunteering here, caring for your children." "Everyone has struggles," Lily said softly. "I'm fortunate in many ways. I have a good job, healthy children, and the ability to help others. Not everyone has those blessings." Thomas was struck speechless by her perspective. Here was a woman who had lost her home, was working 16-hour days, living in a temporary shelter, and still considered herself fortunate because she could help others. "I met Howard," Thomas said after a moment. "He told me he used to work for Tech Vision." Lily's expression grew cautious. "Yes. There are 3 former employees here regularly and a few others who come by occasionally. The restructuring hit this community hard. I had no idea," Thomas admitted. "When we make those decisions at the corporate level, we look at numbers, not people." "I know," Lily said, her voice gentle but direct. "That's why I never mentioned it at work. What would be the point? The decisions were made. All we can do now is try to help each other through the aftermath." Thomas felt something shift inside him, a perspective changing, a realization dawning. For years, he'd run his company based on metrics and efficiency, priding himself on creating a workplace with good benefits and a positive culture. But he'd failed to see the full impact of his decisions beyond the company walls. And here was Lily Chen, one of his lowest-paid employees, doing more for her community, including people his company had discarded, than his entire corporate social responsibility program. "Lily," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need to ask you something important." She looked up, wariness in her eyes. "Would you be willing to help me understand how Tech Vision could better support its employees in this community, not just with donations or token programs, but in meaningful ways that actually make a difference in people's lives?" Surprise flashed across Lily's face, followed by cautious hope. "You really want my input on that?" "More than anyone else's," Thomas said with absolute conviction. "You understand something I've clearly been missing, and I think it's time for that to change." As Lily slowly nodded, Thomas felt the first stirrings of a new vision for his company, one that looked beyond profit margins and productivity metrics to the actual lives of the people who made Tech Vision what it was, and the communities they were part of. What had started as simple curiosity about an employee's request for food had revealed something Thomas had never expected to find: a profound lesson in leadership, compassion, and responsibility that would change the course of his company forever. The drive back to his office felt longer than the journey out. Thomas's mind raced with everything he had seen and learned. The faces of the people at the community center stayed with him. Howard with his injured knee, Mr. Patel with his walker, the young mother trying to rebuild her life, And most of all, Lily and her children giving so much despite having so little. He arrived back at Tech Vision long after his afternoon meetings had ended. His assistant looked up in surprise as he walked in, still wearing the casual clothes he'd changed into for his food delivery mission. "Sir, everyone's been looking for you." "The budget meeting, reschedule it," Thomas said, his voice firm but calm. "And get me the heads of HR, community relations, and finance. I need them in my office first thing tomorrow morning." That night, Thomas barely slept. He sat at his kitchen table until the early hours, making notes, researching community programs, and drafting ideas for what would become the most significant change in Tech Vision's company culture since its founding. The next morning, his executive team listened in stunned silence as Thomas described what he had discovered at the Riverdale Community Center. "We've been missing the bigger picture," he concluded. "We talk about being a responsible company, but we're not seeing the real impact of our decisions on people's lives. That changes today." Over the next month, Thomas threw himself into creating what would eventually be called the Tech Vision Community Support Initiative. He met with Lily several times, always at the center, learning about the community's needs directly from those affected. "The biggest challenges," Lily explained during one such meeting, "are housing stability, food security, and support during transitions like job loss or medical emergencies. People don't just need money. They need connections and resources." Thomas nodded, taking notes. "And what about within the company? What could we be doing better for our current employees?" Lily thought carefully before answering. "Flexible scheduling would make a huge difference for parents, and maybe a program to help with unexpected emergencies, not just loans, but actual support." 6 weeks after his first visit to the center, Thomas stood before the entire company to announce the new initiative. Lily sat in the front row, still looking somewhat amazed to be there. "Starting today," Thomas announced, "Tech Vision will implement several new programs. First, an emergency assistance fund for employees facing housing insecurity, medical costs, or other unexpected hardships. Second, a transitional support program for any employees affected by downsizing, providing 6 months of extended benefits and job placement assistance." Murmurs spread through the audience as Thomas continued. "We're also establishing a community partnership division, which will work directly with organizations like the Riverdale Community Center to provide resources, volunteers, and funding for local support programs. And I'm pleased to announce that Lily Chen has agreed to lead this new division." Gasps and applause filled the room as Lily blushed deeply. Thomas smiled at her before continuing. "Lily has shown extraordinary leadership in her community, supporting dozens of families, including some former Tech Vision employees, through difficult times. She has done this while working double shifts and caring for her own family. I can think of no one better qualified to help us reconnect with the communities we serve." Later, in Thomas's office, Lily still seemed overwhelmed by the announcement. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "I don't have a management background. I've never led a corporate division." "You've been managing an entire community support network with virtually no resources," Thomas pointed out. "You've done more with less than any executive I've ever met. The real question is whether this is what you want." Lily took a deep breath. "The salary you mentioned. It's more than I ever imagined making. My children could have stability again. May could continue her reading program. Danny could join that science camp he's been talking about. And you wouldn't need to work double shifts," Thomas added gently. "You could actually sleep occasionally." A small smile crossed Lily's face. "That would be nice." Her expression grew serious again. "But what about the center? Those people need me too." "That's the beauty of this position," Thomas explained. "The center will be one of our first partner organizations. You'll be able to channel corporate resources to support the work you've already been doing, but on a much larger scale." The transformation began immediately. The first project was finding proper housing for everyone living at the center. Thomas worked with a real estate developer to renovate an abandoned apartment building nearby, creating affordable units for displaced families and seniors on fixed incomes. By spring, Lily and her children had moved into a bright 2-bedroom apartment in the renovated building. Thomas visited on move-in day, carrying a housewarming gift, a set of cookbooks. Since Lily had mentioned how much she missed cooking in a real kitchen, Danny proudly showed Thomas his new room, which he shared with May. "We have actual beds now. And look at my desk. Mom says I can set up my science projects here. May, who had grown more confident in the months since Thomas first met her, proudly read aloud from a book, showing off her progress. My reading teacher says I'm catching up fast, she explained. Lily watched her children with tears in her eyes. I still can't believe this is real, she whispered to Thomas. A few months ago I was worried we'd never have a home again. The changes extended far beyond Lily's family. The Tech Vision Community Support Initiative became a model that other companies began to emulate. The Emergency Assistance Fund had already helped 12 employees avoid eviction or foreclosure. The company cafeteria now regularly prepared extra meals for local shelters and community centers. And perhaps most meaningfully to Thomas, a job training program had been established specifically to help people like Howard re-enter the workforce. 1 year after Thomas's fateful visit to the community center, Tech Vision hosted a celebration of the initiative's accomplishments. The event was held at a newly renovated community space, the former Riverdale Community Center, now expanded and upgraded with help from Tech Vision funding. As Thomas stood to address the gathered employees, community members, and local officials, he felt a sense of pride unlike anything he'd experienced in his business career. A year ago, he began, I thought I knew what it meant to run a successful company. I focused on growth, innovation, and profitability. Those things still matter, but I've learned that true success can't be measured by quarterly reports or stock prices alone. He gestured around the room, where former center residents now had stable housing and jobs, where former employees had found new opportunities, and where current Tech Vision workers volunteered regularly. Real success is measured in lives improved, communities strengthened, and people empowered to help one another. And none of this would have happened if one dedicated employee hadn't shown me what true leadership looks like. Thomas looked directly at Lily, who sat with her children and Mrs. Wu at a table near the front. Leadership isn't about making decisions from a corner office. It's about seeing the humanity in every person, recognizing need where others see only numbers, and taking action even when no one is watching. Lily Chen taught me that, and Tech Vision is a better company because of her. After the speeches, as people mingled and shared stories of how their lives had changed, Thomas found himself standing with Lily in the community garden behind the building, that in the same spot where they had first talked, honestly, about her situation a year earlier. Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this? He asked her. Lily shook her head, looking out at the thriving garden, now 3 times its original size and maintained by community volunteers. Never. I was just trying to survive and help a few neighbors along the way. You did much more than that, Thomas said. You changed how an entire company sees its responsibility to people. And you were willing to listen and learn, Lily pointed out. Most CEOs wouldn't have followed an employee home with food in the first place, let alone transformed their business model afterward. Thomas smiled, watching Danny help an elderly resident harvest tomatoes, while May read a book to a group of younger children under a nearby tree. I think we both learned something important. I discovered that a company's greatest asset isn't its technology or its profit margin, it's its people. And I learned not to be too proud to ask for help, Lily finished, and that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest actions. As the evening sun cast golden light across the garden, Thomas realized that what had begun as simple curiosity about an employee's food requests had become something far more significant. A reminder that behind every business decision were real human lives, and that true leadership meant never losing sight of that fundamental truth.